With the first day of Firestorm, I learned a lot. I learned some paths around the map that would keep me hidden, I learned where different vehicle lockups were located, and I learned that playing with headphones is absolutely the best way to make sure you get all the information you possibly can. But arguably, the most important part of Firestorm this early on is learning the best points that you can drop on the map. Halvoy is absolutely massive, and it's covered in lots of different locations, small, medium, and large, but there are definitely better spots than others, and hitting those spots is important in the early game if you want to gear up and have some good loot. Now, I've compiled my top 5 drop sites for Firestorm in this video in the hope that you guys out there can learn something and get further into those rounds. Bear in mind, however, because the Firestorm is always present on the map when a round starts, it might not always be possible to drop into those locations. But, without further ado, let's get into things. Okay then, drop site number 1, my favourite so far, Baldurs Point. Now this is a small island-like bit of land that juts off the edge of the map into the ocean, but it's still connected by a small road to the mainland. From up high, it does look rather barren, and it doesn't really look very enticing at all, but the closer you come in, the cluster of buildings becomes more obvious. Now, loot density in this location is extremely high, with lots of different types of buildings that house weapons, gadgets, and ammunition. If you want to be sure of some good starting weapons right at the beginning of a round, however, and that's in case enemy players are following you in, head into the Barracks buildings towards the far edge, near the lighthouse. These buildings tend to spawn higher tier loot more often than the other buildings on the island. Rare and epic weapons, they give you greater benefits like specializations and sights. They make the weapons easier to use and target enemies with. Baldurs is also home to a helicopter spawn site just behind the barracks, so if you want to make a quick getaway, use this thing and hop onto the mainland and start looting some of the coastal buildings there. The lighthouse itself does have some loot in it, and the buildings along the edge, and another one that looks like the lighthouse, but is actually a building housing a massive foghorn, that has plenty of loot on the top floor as well. Up there during one round, I found 2 rare Bren guns and a rare Kar-98 as well, both of which are pretty good weapons to be starting around with. The smaller houses in Baldurs have plenty of gadget loot and healing items that you can collect, which is important early game in case somebody has dropped close to you and you need to engage them as soon as possible. There's also a Schwimmwagen on the island as well, down by the yellow house on the coast, and you can use that to quickly get across to the mainland rather than running down the road. Baldurs is currently my favourite drop location on the Halvoy map because there's just loads of loot here. And not too many people are currently visiting this location, since it's quite a far out place and it requires plenty of running to get to the circle sometimes, but I feel that with the amount of loot that's here, you'd be silly not to drop here if you can. Drop site number 2 on my list is Minerva Docks. Now this sits right across the other side of the map from Baldurs Point, and of course, it is the dockyards. It's arguably one of the largest name locations on the Halvoy map. It's chock full of buildings and solid cover as well, making it ideal as a starting point when you're frantically scavenging for loot. You can kind of stay hidden in the shadows. There are plenty of strong boxes housed inside some of the dock buildings, which drop plenty of loot for you to pick up, like healing syringes and explosive gadgets. There are also transport vehicle spawns in this location as well, which is ideal if you've suddenly realised that the next circle is a long way from where you need to be. Hop into the vehicle and get yourself out of the maze of buildings, although be prepared for people to start firing explosives at you the moment you do that. An interesting place to visit as well is the shipwreck off the coast of the dockyard. It's a little bit further along and it's not directly connected, but it's still got strongbox spawn locations here and plenty of floor loot as well. I found it to be a good solo drop point, more than enough for just one person to fill their inventory with, but as a squad, you might want to go somewhere larger, like the main dockyards. More loot there that you can share amongst you all. If you want to split up the squad though, if one person wants to go to the shipwreck and everyone else go to the dockyards, then I guess that's a good tactic. Again, as you're off the main island, if you go to the shipwreck, there is a Schwimmwagen that you can use to move back towards the coast if you need to, but if it's not there, you can always swim. The few times that I've dropped in the dockyard so far, it happened to be close to the start of the plane path across the map, which meant a lot of players were dropping early and securing loot as fast as they possibly could. If that's the case, I'd advise against dropping into the thick of the battle if you want to survive longer into the round, but if you are just looking for some quick kills, then most likely players haven't armoured up yet. This is a good place to start and get your hands dirty. Drop site number 3, again, completely different location. This is Hansen Farms. This sits to the north of the massive lake in the middle of the Halvoy map, and it has a lot of different buildings and areas that you can use to loot up quickly. Now, the loot that you'll find here is not likely to be the best on the map, but there is plenty of it. And in the early game, just having a gun that you can shoot is of course more important than what that gun actually is. Unless it's the Liberator. That thing's like the Mozambique of Battlefield 5 Firestorm, it's just rubbish. You may as well leave that thing on the floor. There's a dense set of buildings in the centre of the farmlands, and that tends to attract a lot of the attention for the entire location, but my preferred spot to drop is actually a little bit further out to the right of the location. There's this large barn that sits on the ground and some smaller outbuildings as well. Here, there's more space that you can use. You can dive into one of the buildings, you can grab your loot, and then you can move back out into the surrounding fields and watch out for enemies that are moving between the buildings. Plenty of strongbox locations here too, so you won't just be scrapping for floor loot, but with it being a central point of the entire Battle Royale map, I've seen plenty of players hold on and drop for this location because they know there's a high density of loot in that central village point. Lots of people love to drop where they know other players are going to be dropping so that they can get lots of kills at the start of a round, but that outer section of buildings is also really good if you're not 100% confident of going into some heavy gunfights. Also, you can find some tractors in this location, which is obviously always fun. Now, drop site number 4 is actually an unnamed location, but it's one that I found extremely beneficial already, not only as a drop point, but somewhere that you can go after dropping if you want to try and get some more loot. It's this cluster of buildings on the map here, south of the Pluto dig site, and it's home to a few barracks buildings and one of the large antenna that you can see across the Halvoy map. Plenty of loot opportunities here, but you need to be landing within the compound area that's been set up. Dropping outside, you'll be met with taller sandbag walls and fences, and that makes you an obvious target when you're trying to vault in whilst everyone else has already got their first weapon. So try and get yourself into one of the buildings as soon as you can and grab the first weapon on the ground. The antenna itself has a few different levels to it with loot scattered on those platforms, but you do make yourself another very obvious target by going up there, and if you're shot at, your immediate thought is to jump down because who wants to use a ladder? That thing's going to make you even more of a target. But of course, jumping could just end up with you dying because of that. If you want the antenna loot, land on it straight away and then get yourself down on the ground as quick as possible. I like this location again because it provides lots of cover. The building blocks lines of sight across the compound, but swing round 90 degrees from another angle, and you can look down the lines of the buildings and catch people using the walls as cover. There's also a few strong boxes in this location as well, around the base of the antenna, so you can go for those if you want to. And as I said, if you didn't drop here, try and make your way to it if you're nearby, because there is plenty of loot for you to scavenge. And drop site number 5 is again near the lake. This is Halvdella. It's a lakeside town at the bottom of a large sloping hill to the left side of the map, and it's got plenty of buildings for you to loot and use as cover. Now, I found during one of my rounds that several people, although they didn't drop there like I did, they used it as a path towards the next circle, and I managed to take advantage of that while staking out the hill above the town. It also links into a few islands on the lake as well, which have their own buildings on them, providing some other smaller looting opportunities if you didn't get what you need from those main buildings. Like Hansen Farms, the loot here doesn't tend to be the highest rarity in the game, although there is a chance that you can get some of that stuff, but there's simply plenty of loot that you can get your hands on, which is important. Cover in this location is quite limited, and I'd say that really the buildings are only your cover, so if you know where someone is and you've got the right weapons, you might want to try and storm their building and try and take them down. Running out in the open is likely to get you shot or killed, so be aware for that and look out for others looking at you through the windows. Now, of course, there are plenty more drop sites than this on the Halvoy map. You've got the major dig site called Pluto and the train yard, those come to mind, but these 5 are ones that have served me well so far and offer plenty of loot to grab before trying to engage some of your enemies. Now, I hope you found this video helpful today and you'll be able to use some of this information to get yourself your first Firestorm win. Drop this video a like if you did enjoy it and it did help you, and maybe leave some of your tips and tricks down below in the comments section. But until next time, my name is Westie, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.